came here to Mass on the Feast of the Transfiguration, the Sunday that we talk about the Transfiguration. And he called after it's his first time he was ever here, and after in the middle of the week he called the pastor out and said, you know, I didn't really feel comfortable in your church. It's sort of oddly arranged. And he said that the homily was weird, to say the least. That dialogue you set up between those paintings on the wall and people in the congregation was okay when you were talking about Augustine and his line about, well, make me chaste, Lord, but not yet. I thought that was pretty good. But then you got to that Romero, and he was in a dialogue, one of the paintings of Romero. And he's no saint. He's a commie, a communist. Pinko. Oh, and then you got him on one of those paintings up there on the wall. But what I really am upset about was that other one I saw up there of Ghandi, that Buddhist guy. What's he doing up there? You shouldn't have him up there in that church of yours. So, well, the pastor was sort of interested in those comments and thought it would be good to probe a little further about the man's religious literacy. And well, you know, tell me a little bit more about yourself. And so he says, well, look at it. He says, I went to a really good Catholic school over 30 years ago. I graduated, and that was good, solid stuff I got. They didn't have pictures of Ghandi in it. And I learned a lot and got that pretty straight, and I'm hanging on to that. And I'm a good Catholic. I'm faithful to my wife, and I work hard, and I get to church every week, and I'm pretty satisfied with where I'm at with my faith. And the man upstairs rewards me. I've had a good life, I've led a good life, and the man upstairs has blessed me with a good wife and children, and life is good for me. But when I didn't call to tell you about myself, I want to know, what the hell is Ghandi doing? Well, the pastor thought, well, this guy is very open to dialogue, so I'll take a shot. And the pastor said, well, look, he says, I'd like to try to explain that to you, but it's probably going to take too long. What I'd suggest is I'm going to give a lecture on Ghandi, and I suggest you come to the lecture. So the question is Sam here?
Everybody stands up, you know.
Sam? Identify yourself. Well, Eric, take a tape and send it to him. Well, interesting to try to respond to that in some ways. First of all, I might point out to Sam that they're not paintings, they're tapestries, and done by a famous artist, John Nava, and they're actually done on a computerized loom in Bruges, Belgium. And they're fine pieces of artwork. So they're tapestries. And in fact, we have a whole lecture series on them. We had Michael Hines is coming in to talk about Augustine, and Kathy Hilkert's going to talk, she was president of CTSA, and going to talk about Catherine of Siena. And was it Margaret Files talking about the Oscar Romero? Who did I miss? Rick has arranged all this. Yes, my friend Al Cade was talking about Kateri Tekakwitha, and finally, the man who arranged the whole series, Dr. Richard Gallardi, will be talking about St. Thomas Aquinas. So a lot of people wanted to talk about Aquinas, but Rick wanted and gets to talk about him. So we had a whole series about Ireland's tapestries. So I tried to tell Sam, look, the tapestries up there, one reason is because members of the parish chose him to be up there. Well, that's not going to wash with Sam, is it? That's not going to be. So, well, Sam, that represents for us part of our understanding of the communion of saints. We think that these figures up here represent the people we're still united with. We saw gather here for liturgy. It's really good. We have all the current members of the church here, and then we have some of the deceased members of the great communion of saints who surround us. So the idea that we're partaking in a heavenly banquet, and we're offering up our gifts to God along with these wonderful people who surround us. And as a matter of fact, the Second Vatican Council took a very optimistic view of salvation. The Council taught us that, well, people who follow their conscience can be saved. God is goodness. Even people who have not yet learned to call God by name can be saved if they follow their conscience. And so, in a sense, having Ghandi up there is a way of expressing that fundamental belief of the Council. So also it brings to mind the Council's idea that we can learn from people in other religious traditions. That the great world religions are vehicles of truth and goodness and of God's grace, and that we can learn from them. So I try to convince Sam that this is a possibility up there. This is, instead of being negative about it and all upset, it makes a point. Patrick O'Gara, I presume Patrick isn't here either. He wrote in the Blade a few years ago now that Catholics think that Mohandas Gandhi is in hell. Wrote that in the Blade. So I contacted him and suggested, well, it's not the only, I don't think Catholics think that Gandhi's in hell. They think he's a holy person with God. So I entered into a long-term discussion with Patrick about that very question, about being open to people of other religious faiths. So the suggestion is that I would invite Sam and everybody else to pass over to Gandhi's standpoint, to try to see our faith, most of us Christians here, I think, although not all, we'd like to go to the Hindu temple to be here, so. But I speak from that Christian perspective, inviting us as Christians to see if Gandhi can't help us to see and understand our own religion in a better way. Isn't it true that sometimes the outsider sees things that the insider can't see? And so that's the approach. I'm inviting us to pass over. That comes from John Dunn, the teacher of Notre Dame. Pass over to somebody else's viewpoint. Crawl behind their eyes for a while and see what you can learn there. Then you would come back to your own standpoint, hopefully enriched. That's part of how I think this whole series is going to work here, using these beautiful tapestries done by John Novel. Now, I think that Gandhi actually has something really important to say to Sam about his own outlook. And we need to just look, I'm going to weave in parts of Gandhi's life. It's not a biography or anything, but he was not a Buddhist, Sam, I hate to tell you. I mean, he's a Hindu, influenced by the Hindu tradition, although he might have been a little bit more interactive with Buddhists and Jains than some other people in his culture. But he was actually steeped in the Hindu tradition. His mother was a regular goer to the temple, and so he was exposed to that. And he was involved in an arranged marriage at the age of 13 with a woman by the name of Kasturbai. I'm not going to raise Gandhi up as an example of how to enter into a marriage of mutuality, devoid of all patriarchal tendencies or sexist outlook. No, we're not raising Mohandas Gandhi up for that reason. She was a faithful wife for over half a century and was very good to him, but he saw her very often more as a student, as someone he would need to teach, and he was harsh with her at times. And as we'll see later on, when he was about in the middle 30s, he made a vow of celibacy without consulting with her. We're probably not going to raise them up in that way. I think that's probably true of all the people up here. I mean, they're not perfect in every way, but it's nice to find out what they were good at. So Ghandi, another important event in his early life, besides the arranged marriage, was the death of his father. He was very good at taking care of his father while he was ill, but at the very moment when he died, he was with his wife, as he says, in the grip of lust, and felt terribly guilty about that. One of the interesting analyses of Gandhi's life comes from Eric Erickson, a psychotherapist, and he thinks that Ghandi, that was a very important event in Gandhi's life. He felt horribly guilty that he wasn't with his father at the moment he died, and that sort of ever after he had to overcome that or deal with that particular thing. Well, after that he went to England and studied and became a lawyer. And while he was in England, he ran into some Christian people who got him to read the Bible. And so he started in the book of Genesis, and his characterization of it, that he just wasn't all that thrilled with what we call the Old Testament. He found the book of Numbers to be especially boring, he said. But when he got to the New Testament in the Gospel of Matthew, it was all worth it, especially when he got to chapters 5 to 7 and encountered the great Sermon on the Mount. It said it touched his heart. It got to the very core of his being. It spoke to him. And he was very taken with all those ideas of go the extra mile and turn the other cheek. Resist not evil, love your enemies. Those are all themes that became extremely important to Ghandi. Scott, was I supposed to push this, or did you do it when I forgot? Well, here, see, this is how you do this. Finding out about Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount was part of that great quest that he was on. His autobiography is entitled My Experiments with Truth. And when he encountered the Sermon on the Mount then, it became a touchstone for him. It became something that he went back to throughout his life. The nonviolence that was suggested by the Sermon on the Mount appealed to him. He saw Jesus as a divine teacher, as a wonderful prophet, as like a guru. You know, Ghandi himself never had a spiritual director himself. He thought everyone else should have one, but he never did have one himself. But I guess you would say that he found it in the sacred scriptures and the world traditions, the kind of key that he felt he needed to live better. He was taken with Jesus in a number of ways. He loved the prodigal son story. Again, he saw that as a statement about the human condition, where one really could not control another's behavior. The father couldn't control the son. But that the important thing in human relationships is to stay open when people repent. To stay open when people want to start over with us again. He was not, on the other hand, he's so taken with the Sermon on the Mount and with Jesus and what he was all about, that, but he was not pleased with Christian people. And he thought that Christians didn't take the Sermon on the Mount seriously. That they saw themselves somehow functioning in a more minimal kind of way. It would be like Sam thinking that, well, the priests, they should be the holy ones. They're the professional holy people. But Sam gets by with being faithful to his wife and not getting drunk and not killing anybody and thinks that that's good enough for him to get to heaven. He's sort of self-satisfied with that. And of course, what Ghandi kept saying is that is not good enough. That we have to strive for something greater, that there's ideals that are before us. And so his whole life becomes this experiment with truth, to try to find a way to live with greater idealism, find a way to be a better servant of the human family. And he's willing to experiment with that. He's willing to fail. And he understands clearly that he'll never grasp all that truth that he wants, that it's too much for him. God is like the sun that he could never comprehend. The rays would go out, you could never get hold of that sun. And so he understood that we're in a search over a period of time. And he kept coming back to Jesus as one of those prophets or gurus that would indeed help him. So when I get back to Sam and talk to him the next time, I wanted to say, pass over to Ghandi and you'll see something else. He might help you get over some of your self-sufficiency, your self-righteousness. You might be able to learn something from him. And that would be important in your life. You can't just sit on dead center. What you learned in that Catholic high school is good, but it's not enough. You have to keep learning and developing and growing. That's part of the joy of life. And I want to take Sam back to his own tradition and say, Sam, it's not just Ghandi, but he's like a mirror forcing you to look back at your own tradition. And in that tradition, the Second Vatican Council says through baptism, we're all called to holiness. There aren't any second-class citizens in the church. There aren't just priests and nuns who are supposed to be holy, and everyone else just gets away with what they can do. No, we're all called to that holiness. So in a sense, that's what happens when we pass over to Ghandi. He's helping us see the Sermon on the Mount's for all of us. It's a high ideal. None of us can live up to it, but we have no right to sweep it under the rug. We have no right to say, well, that applies to other people, or that's not realistic. We can't do that. The Sermon on the Mount remains a challenge to all of us. So we don't become self-righteous, so we don't think we've got it made, and so that we keep struggling in one way or another to grow and become better people. Gandhi's line is like Leon Bloy's, that the only real sadness in life is not to become a saint, to fail to become a saint. That's the only real sadness that we would really have to worry about. Also, I think Ghandi helps us to understand that the path to that holiness that he's calling all of us to is through our everyday life, through the world. The path of holiness passes through the world of action, the world of challenge in our everyday life. And then there's the wonderful little quotes that I have from Ghandi that give this feeling of there's always more. Our capacity for loving ever expands. That's a quote I love from Karl Rahner. Love is true to itself only if it's prepared to give more tomorrow than today. It seems like the great spiritual masters have always understood that. We can always count, he says, on the sustaining energy of God. So, there we got Sam, an answer to him. Be open to Ghandi. He's part of the communion of saints, and he helps us see things we might have missed, especially the great Sermon on the Mount. Now, my second little vignette, and who I want to have Ghandi interact with, I'm calling her Miriam. Miriam is a very talented, bright woman. She always did well in school and was popular with everybody. And she was a valedictorian in her high school class. She went on to college and got good grades. She got a business degree, went out into the business world, got a good start, good job. She's just gradually moving up the ladder. She's thankful to God for her blessings. She remembers to take care of other people. She's involved in ways of helping the poor and so on. And she feels very fulfilled. She's very pleased with her life. She feels self-confident, feels good about herself. She's pleased that she can make a contribution. She thanks God for that. And one day there's a new position that opens up in the firm, and it's obviously the position for her. She's earned it, she's in line for it, and she doesn't get it. And it's just tears her up. It's the first time she's ever encountered personally that glass ceiling. It keeps her from moving forward. And it's just so hard for her to manage. And she's now begins to lose confidence in herself. She's the same person, but she sees herself so differently now. She sees herself as a failure. And it's harder for her to reach out to others. She's lost her self-confidence and her self-esteem. And she's trying to figure out what to do about that. Now, Ghandi is a good person for her to interact with. I'll go back to when Ghandi was in England. He not only read the Bible, and especially the New Testament, especially Matthew 5 to 7, the Sermon on the Mount, and the prodigal son story, but he read the Bhagavad Gita, the great spiritual writings within Hinduism. He had to admit he had never read it when he was in India. But now in England, some friends wanted to discuss it, so he had to read it. And one way to think of the Gita is that it is a counterpoint to the Sermon on the Mount within the Hindu holy writings. And in the Gita, there's 18 chapters, and it's in the form of a conversation between the warrior Arjuna and his charioteer, who just fortunately happens to be the great incarnation Krishna. So his charioteer is Krishna. And the problem Arjuna faces is something like this. He's a warrior and he has to fight, but the people he has to fight are his own kinsfolk. And so he's in a horrible dilemma. If he withdraws, he's going to be cowardly and not meet his responsibilities. If he fights and defeats them, he's going to be very upset because he's killed his own kinsfolk. And if he gets defeated and his men, that's going to be a terrible disaster as well. So in the Gita, that is the problem that Arjuna faces. And Krishna gives the advice to Arjuna. No, you can't withdraw. You have to fight. But you have to fight without caring whether you win or lose. That's essentially, the Gita has all kind of good stuff about many aspects of life. But that's sort of the essential story. And Ghandi reinterpreted the Gita in a way that I think a lot of his contemporaries did not. But he calls it, would you move that, Scott, for me? You're waiting for me. Does it work? Do you think that'd be good for Miriam to meditate on? You got a message for Miriam? No. So Ghandi reinterprets the Gita as saying, he calls it the matchless remedy for the human condition. For him, the Gita was the greatest of all the sacred writings. He studied it over and over. In fact, in his middle 30s, he began to memorize it. He memorized 13 of the 18 chapters, diverted along the way. You know, he had it when he showered. He had it in his shower verses up there, so he could, while he was showering, he could memorize the verses in the Gita. The matchless remedy is to renounce the fruits of action. Well, what did that mean for him? It meant that in life, the important thing is to concentrate on the effort. You know, and Ghandi was big on effort. I mean, in all these campaigns for justice and so on and freedom, you know, he worked very carefully. He planned things. He had strategies. He published journals, worked out ways of achieving his goals. So the important thing for him was to concentrate on the effort in life. Make sure we meet our responsibilities, do the strategizing, do what we're supposed to do, but then let go of the fruits of action. Don't worry about whether it succeeds or fails. And one of the things we see about Miriam is that Miriam lives in a comparative mode. Something that we probably all can relate to. In other words, Miriam feels good when she's smarter than everybody else in her class. She's feeling great when she's chosen as the valedictorian. Well, she finds a lot of fulfillment in the fact that she moves up the ranks and is making a lot of money and can do all these good things. Her self-worth is tied to being better than other people. And of course, Ghandi says, well, you shouldn't get too puffed up with that. Because when time comes when you're compared with somebody who's better than you are, then there's no place to go except down. So there's a sort of practical wisdom that Ghandi has in all of this. Renounce the fruits of action. Now, Ghandi not only taught that, is that clear enough? It's like when I'm putting, I try to be Ghandi. I'm just going to stroke the ball. I don't care if it goes in or not. I'm not going to be nervous that it won't go in the hole. I'm just going to concentrate on doing it right. So don't worry about the fruits of action. Don't worry about the results. And then you'll perform a lot better. Actually, it's found in the Chinese wisdom literature as well. The same sort of idea. Don't worry about all that. And then you will do better. It's when the success becomes like this, got to succeed, that then the body doesn't work right. That's frankly never worked for me, so never. But it's an effort. But not only, Ghandi didn't just talk about that, that's the way he tried to function. I don't think he always succeeded himself. He tried to put his effort in and do everything right, and fast and pray and make sure there's not going to be any violence in the marches and so on. But, as a matter of fact, I remember one time when one of the marches in India got out of control and there was violence, he just felt horrible. He was terribly upset. He pulled off the whole march and declared a day of fasting and penance for the violence that had occurred. So he tried to live it out in his own life. I'm not sure that anybody, including Miriam, is going to be able to do that. But I do think that Miriam's probably going to function better in life if she is able to be less in that comparative mode. If she's able, in other words, what Ghandi would have us do in a sense is compete against our own potential and not other people. Just to say, I'm able, in fact he says you got to keep 2 feet on the ground, on the solid earth, when we're thinking through our lives like this. So he thinks that we will function better. Well, see if that isn't correct. If we pass over to Gandhi's eyes, nobody's going to do that entirely. But wouldn't it be important for our success-oriented culture to see that? Wouldn't life look different if it wasn't such a striving and had to be number one and be better than other people? If we could be more satisfied with what we've been given, with the talents we've got, be able to go to bed at night and say, Lord, I did my best. I did the best I could. I put it in your hands. That would be a Christian way, maybe, of thinking of this. Try to do the best we can and then hand it over to God and let God take it from there. All right, let me try another one. this. And what you do with the start, Scott, is you press this. But what I've noticed is that while I'm talking, everybody reads. I guess I thought if it would take a second to move. You got that? Sort of absorbed here. Here's my next one. This is Isaac. Isaac's a good Christian man. He's a hard worker. He lives by moral principle, puts the bread on the table for his family. His physical and external journey in life looks good. Walking a good path, straight and narrow. But his wife will tell you that she's not entirely happy with him. Doesn't give her any trouble, doesn't yell at her, or do anything, doesn't drink or carouse or anything like that. But she can't get him to talk with her at a deeper level. He seems sort of incapable. She asks him, well, what are you feeling? Isaac says, well, if I knew, I'd tell you. But I don't know what I'm feeling. Isaac is not in touch with his inner life. For him, the whole of life is an external journey. He has little sense of what it might be to go within, to look inside. Now, he says prayers. He says, hey, before he goes to bed at night, he does, like he learned in grade school, he says 3 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys, and 3 Glory be to the Fathers before he goes to bed at night. Oh, so he's a man of prayer. But when he hears talk in church about meditating or reflecting, he has no idea what that's about. Or people talk about being on a spiritual path, a spiritual journey. He's clueless. He doesn't know what that would be about or how he would talk about it or what that means for his life. He does the Lenten discipline every year, really hard. He doesn't eat dessert, doesn't eat any chocolate, and he cuts down on his drinking every Lent. And it's hard. He has to really struggle. And at the end of Lent, he feels good. He did something hard. But if you asked him what that had to do with his spiritual life, he wouldn't know. I mean, did that make you a better person? Well, I don't know. I did it. What do you want? Well, I did it. It was hard and I did it. So, Isaac, he likes, when he relaxes, he comes home, he works hard work, he does some of the things his wife wants to do. Then he wants to sit and watch the basketball game. On Monday night, he wants to sit and watch the football game. He's even willing to do some of the folding of the laundry while he's doing it. But he doesn't want to be bugged, and he doesn't want to talk, and he doesn't want her asking him how he feels or how his spiritual journey's going. He just wants to watch the game. And don't bug me. So, we're going to put Isaac in dialogue now with Ghandi. Well, to tell more of his story, where we had him in England as a lawyer, he read there the scriptures and so on. Now, he returns to India. He's a lawyer now, tries to practice law. He doesn't really get any place, not a very successful practice. So one day, his brother says to him, well, there's this big firm that's got a big deal contract going on in South Africa. How about going and representing them? And so Ghandi agrees to do that. So he goes over to South Africa and starts working on his case, and it's very involved, and he doesn't understand much of it, and he's got to study up. It's got all kind of financial accounting that he doesn't know anything about, studying up. So then he has to make a trip. And so the people are retaining him, get him a first-class ticket on the train. So he's on the train, first-class ticket, and somebody, one of the white South Africans, comes up there and sees him. And he goes and reports him to one of the conductors on the train, who comes up to him and says, "You can't sit up here. You got to go sit in that van compartment in the back where all the coolies sat." That was the derisive term for Indians that the white South Africans used. The coolies, you got to go back there. So Ghandi said, "I got a first-class ticket. I'm not going back there." And the guy says, "Well, you're not going. We're going to throw you off the train." So when they got to the next stop, they threw him off the train, threw his luggage there. And it was very cold that night, and he was sitting in the railway station all by himself. I think it was one other person came in through the night. He's sitting there, and he's thinking, what do I do? Do I forget this? Do I go back to India? He said, no. What I'm going to do is spend my life fighting this kind of racial prejudice. It was a great moment of self-realization for Ghandi. The rest of the trip even got worse. He ended up on a stagecoach. And again, sitting where he was, there was a white South African there who demanded that he move. And it even got into like a wrestling match. Gandhi's holding on to his seat like this, and the guy's trying to pull him out of the seat. Finally, somebody intervened and sort of straightened the thing out. So he encountered this racial prejudice on this one trip, and of course, it kept happening to him in South Africa. And so he decides at that moment to devote his life to working for justice and to overcome prejudice. And so, shortly after in South Africa, he began to go about this very systematically. He established an ashram. In fact, he called one Tolstoy Farm, because he learned a lot from Leo Tolstoy and his outlook on nonviolence and his own take on the Sermon on the Mount. And he also read Thoreau and about civil disobedience and how that became important. So he founds a journal so he can propagate his ideas. And people living in the ashram are taught these deeper principles and so on. And so Ghandi, in all of this, is coming to a deeper realization of who he is and what it's all about. And he says that through this life of action, through this service of trying to uproot this prejudice, he is pursuing truth. It's a pursuit of truth. That's what counts. In all of the process, it's like the liberation theologians talk about praxis. That is, when you are doing something on behalf of justice, there's a theory involved. There's some principle that is moving you to function in this way. And so Ghandi had this theory that it was in that life of action, trying to do good and serving humanity, that one would come to understand oneself in a deeper way. That one would come to a greater realization of the truth. So that set Ghandi off on this lifelong pursuit of truth, self-realization. We have to see the contrast with, what am I talking about? Isaac? Be the last one I was talking about? Isaac, yeah. You know, there's a... Isaac might be into self-fulfillment that comes from the external journey. But Ghandi, representing the Eastern world, says, no, what happens if you think about it as self-realization? It's coming to deeper perceptions of the truth. So then Ghandi saw himself as seeking the truth. This is his whole life mission now. This is what he's passionate about. And he got to think that God is truth. Yeah, that's it. God is truth. through dialogues with skeptics and atheists. He began to put it another way. He says, well, truth is God. Truth is God. So you can see that close connection that he made. As he said, God is the certainty hidden in our uncertainty. He's the helper who helps us when we're helpless. He's the one who's always present and close within. Enables us to control our minds and passions. So God, he said at one point, he says, well, if God is not really a personal being like my Father is, he's more than that. He's infinitely more than my earthly father. So when we begin to see Gandhi's notion of God, it's a great sense that God is ultimately mysterious, and that you can't control this God, and that we're in a constant search to be close to this God. And then Gandhi talked about turning the searchlight within. And so he was more responsive to what he called the inner voice. You can see why this is important for Isaac. He's telling Isaac, there's a whole world you're missing, Isaac. The whole life, it's the inner life. There's an inner voice, and Gandhi talks about that inner voice that he would hear. And very often it would come in the times of great tension and when he was distraught. And after a lot of struggle and questioning, seeking the truth, pursuing the truth, the inner voice would speak to him. And to be very sure at times that he knew exactly what to do in this pursuit of justice, the pursuit of peace and racial harmony. And other times it wasn't clear. The inner voice, he would hear it, but he wasn't exactly sure where it was taking him or what he should be doing. A lot of times, Gandhi was a man of great prayer. He did personal prayer. He did mantra meditation that some people here do, where you're conscious of your breathing, and as you let your breath out, you say your short prayer, which is often called a mantra. He did a personal mantra. He prayed an hour every morning and an hour every evening. I remember Martin Luther King, when he learned that, was so taken with that idea that Gandhi would spend that much time in prayer, an hour. He used to get up at 4:30 with everyone else in the ashram, spend the first hour in prayer. Martin Luther King came back to the United States after he visited India, saying that's what he wanted to do. And he tried in some fashion, not terribly successful, but he saw it as a great ideal. So Gandhi often heard that inner voice in the midst of his prayer life, and especially when he was silent. He loved silent prayer. He loved to just be in the presence of truth. It reminds me that his common experience with people interacting with Gandhi was they couldn't lie in his presence. It was impossible. There was all kinds of reports of people who met him casually, met him in serious conversation. They couldn't lie. They felt they were in the presence of a man of truth, a man who understood the importance of truth in life. But it also said that even more important was finding self-realization in a life of action. As one of his friends said, that he was a saint not so much of contemplation, but of action. And Gandhi himself said, if you want to know what I was about, don't read what I wrote. They can burn that with me. I don't care what I wrote. Look at my life. So it was my example. And so he thought that the way he lived would be the real test of what he was about. So he found that in action and doing things is when he came to greater self-realization. That's why he's experimenting with truth, trying different things. And of course it was while he was in South Africa that he developed, even in greater detail, a lot of the renunciations. He became convinced that if he was going to live according to truth, he had to control his passions. So he made that vow of celibacy. And so he fasted regularly and abstained from meat. And he would do things like ride third class on the trains on purpose. So, and he would bring people, lower classes, into his ashram so that he would interact with those people. So we have that whole idea of striving for the truth in the midst of action. So part of, I guess, what we want to say to Isaac is, your external journey is great. Keep it up. But while you're doing it, try to be more mindful. The Eastern religions are good at that. Be more mindful of what's happening, of what you're doing, of how you're interacting with people, what impact you're making on people, what other people are feeling, thinking as you walk through your day. Somehow, while I was preparing all this, I went back to my great conversation that I had with Václav Mali, who's now a bishop in Czechoslovakia. He was the one that was arrested time after time by the communists, and always, they didn't want him to go jump on the crucifix, stomp on Jesus. And he said, just mute the criticism a little. Just mute it a little. I never forget sitting in his apartment and interacting with this man of faith and courage. And he said, your problems in the Western world are different than ours under the communists. The dynamic's the same. Stand up for the truth. And don't give in to falsehood in any small way. Fight for the truth. Fight to be honest. Fight to be straightforward. Don't give in just an inch. That's what I learned in all of those imprisonments when they were torturing me and when all of the difficult times I had. You can't give in 1 inch. All they wanted me to do is do one tiny thing that would be more open to them. And I thought of Mali when reading Ghandi. He's got that same powerful appeal. Stick with the truth. Be upright. Be honest. Don't give in even a little bit. It will take you down a terrible path. I thought of Thomas Merton as well when he said that we're to move from the false self to the true self. So what do I want Isaac to do? I'd like him in dialogue with Ghandi to spend time meditating each day. It's quiet time. Just sit in the chair, turn the TV off, and just be quiet for a while. Try to be open spirit. Don't talk. Secondly, try to recognize and name some of those deeper emotions. Try to talk to your wife when she asks you. Don't blow her off. Say, well, let me struggle with this. Maybe it's like this. It's sort of positive what I feel. Maybe it's this. Try to do that. Try to do Lenten penance. That is, don't watch as much sports on TV. This is a way of achieving greater self-realization of whether I'm addicted to it or not, or whether I've made an idol out of that world or not, whether it keeps me from relating to other human beings in an ordinary, healthy way. Check it out, Isaac, or all the Isaacs present. Check it out. Do some spiritual reading. Make a retreat. Do something that will open up that inner world to you. Here's what you do, Scott. It's a magic button. What's interesting is that Ghandi was successful in many ways in South Africa. He got some laws changed. He got minority marriages recognized there. In other words, it worked. It's nonviolent marches, protests, strikes. Good things happen. So he goes back to India now. He spent 20 years in South Africa. 20 years. That refined a lot of this thing. Now he goes back to India. Now he takes on the big task of freeing his country, getting independence from India, from British colonial rule. So he comes back and he becomes the leader of that. What does he do? Oh, I'm supposed to have a person, aren't I? Yeah. This is Lydia. Lydia is a Catholic, lives a very private life, not really too worried about world affairs. She doesn't vote. She's very private about her religion. She feels very strongly about it. She's very sensitive to the problem of violence. She thinks violence is a horrible thing. She just intuitively thinks that the Iraq War is nuts, crazy, that violence breeds violence. And she thinks that that is the way human beings ought to live. But she never talks about it. She isn't public about it. She thinks that everyone will think she's impractical, or that she doesn't know what she's talking about. She has no political sophistication. So this is Lydia's problem. She lives in a private world, but she sees the problems of violence and so on. So we got Ghandi. He goes back to India. He's 45 years old, trying to help them achieve independence. He does the same thing. These large marches, work stoppages, shut down the whole country at times. And his whole bit is to get the British to leave voluntarily. So to do that, he's going to use this method of active nonviolence. So we're going to have strikes, we're going to have marches. Probably the most famous is the Great Salt March, 1930. Walked a couple hundred miles in a little over 3 weeks to the sea. It was all. Now, the background of this is the Indians couldn't have their own salt unless they bought it from the British monopoly. So they weren't allowed to have salt unless they bought it from the British monopoly. So Ghandi devises this great salt march. Thousands of people are marching to the sea. And when Ghandi gets there, he's very good at symbolic action. He takes a little salt from the waves and takes it into his possession. Well, Ghandi did that kind of civil disobedience in many cases. In fact, he spent about a total of 6 years in jail throughout his life, constantly being arrested for this kind of civil disobedience. People started getting their own salt all over the country. It was all an effort to try to get the Indians to be more self-reliant and to show the injustice of the system in which they were living. One of the things he tried to emphasize was for people to spin their own cloth, so they wouldn't have to buy cloth from England. And so the spinning wheel became a great symbol of self-reliance for the Indian. In fact, he kept a spinning wheel in his room. And in many places around India, that became the symbol of being self-reliant, not having to rely on the British colonial powers. So, over a period of time, I mean, as the story goes, they win independence. Finally it happens through this whole nonviolent approach. He thought that violence was the chief malady of the 20th century. He talked about ahimsa and satyagraha. Did I say it right? Close. Satyagraha. What was that? Close. Anyway, that means truth force, truth power. And so for him, nonviolence wasn't passivity, just sit around. It was active. And he thought that was the greatest power in the world. It was like our idea of love, this nonviolent approach. Love is the great power that can change the world. And he was constantly saying that the purpose isn't to humiliate the enemy. In fact, in South Africa, some of the people he ended up defeating in terms of the laws and the approaches and so on became his friends or admirers. So he always said, he's not trying to win. In fact, one of the things he did was go on fast unto death. He did that 17 times. Started a fast, he's going to fast till he dies, unless they change, unless the mill workers get their raise or whatever. That was the first. He did it his first time, he just did it spontaneously, trying to get raised for mill workers. And after 3 days, the mill worker owners caved in and gave the raise. So we began to see that this was a tactic that could work. But he worried about that it might even be an unfair tactic, putting too much pressure on the owners. It shows you where his mind was. So he wanted to do this. It was active. It was powerful. You had to fast before you did it. When you're going to have a march, you have to pray so no one gets violent in the midst of the march. You try to do the whole thing with grace and be a cheerful and joyful person as you go about it. Ghandi might seem severe in many ways, but people who knew him well report that he laughed easily. And one of the touchstones for him of whether you were doing it right was that it was joyful. That the whole nonviolent approach had a joy about it. And that it was somehow was catching. He thought it would be catching. He thought if you acted like this, the oppressors would melt. That they would see the power of love and that it would come forward. So, as we know, finally the Independence Day came for India, and Ghandi himself didn't participate in the celebration because he was worried about the violence and how apropos this is between Muslims and Hindus. So one of the criticisms, I was talking to a young woman from India, said there's a common criticism among young people in India that Ghandi didn't do it all right, especially on the question of ending up the partition into Pakistan and to India and the Muslim-Hindu thing, that he could have done that better. But what seems clear to me that he wanted it to work. And he didn't participate in the festivities because the Muslims and Hindus weren't getting along. No, he actually, in his experiments with truth, maybe there's another one of the books that I'm blocking on it, but that he talked some Muslims into the conviction that nonviolence was in accord with the Quran and not against the Quran. Very important kind of effort that he made. So he often drew on principles from Christianity when he talked about nonviolence. So it's not passive, it's active, you got to strategize, and it's a powerful force. And what Lydia needs to hear is, it works. It works. And we know that in the United States, Martin Luther King, we borrowed so much of this from Ghandi. With the marches and the civil rights movement, we did get civil rights legislation. We got the Voting Rights Acts. We got rid of the Jim Crow laws in the South. It was effective. It worked. And that becomes, I think, one of Gandhi's great legacies in all of this, active nonviolence. So maybe to Lydia, it's something like this. Why don't you speak up a little bit more? Maybe it would be good if you voted and participated in the political process. Maybe you ought to have your voice heard in the discussions that go on. Why don't you join Pax Christi and work with a group of people who are interested in peace? And then you'll meet in Pax Christi other people who have the same outlook on violence that you do. And you meet kindred souls who believe that nonviolence is the way to move forward, that violence just perpetuates itself, creates a bad cycle. So Ghandi might speak to Lydia in that kind of way to help her as well. So the invitation is, what the hell is Ghandi doing up there? Sam? He's up there because he could help the Christians who get here for worship, who assemble for worship, to see their own tradition in a better way. Because if you let him touch you, you might see the message of Jesus and the call to holiness and the idealism that is part of our own faith and the call to deepen our spiritual journey and to find our own ways to be active in the political realm and to make a difference in our world, to be leaven for our society. I am going to stop there, close to being on time, as a model for all the other speakers. And we will take a 2-minute break. People leaving the parking lot, there are 2 exits, that will help. And if some people might want to react to this lecture by turning white as you go out. Let's take a 2-minute break.
Ghandi, the difference between Ghandi and Merton is this idea of self-realization. They have, did you see that as the same?
So you got a question.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question about the relationship between Ghandi and Thomas Merton and on the question of self-realization. I mean, my own quick sense is that they're very close together. First of all, I mean, Ghandi comes out of the Eastern world. In the Eastern world, self-realization is a commonplace. In other words, when they, in the Eastern world, tends to see what's the problem of life, it's illusion. The human problem is illusion. We don't see reality as it is, as it should be, as it really is. So the illusions can be all different kinds. We don't understand our strengths and weaknesses, or the greatest illusion in the Buddhist world is that there is a self to be doing this. So, I mean, they are steeped in that. It's their mindset. So when they think about religion and religious practices, it is to achieve satori, or enlightenment. That's what the spiritual journey is all about for them. To achieve enlightenment, to see reality as it is, to move beyond the illusory. So a lot of their meditation techniques are designed to get to that point of illumination. So that's home base. That's fertile ground for them. That's the matrix out of which they work. Thomas Merton, being a Westerner, grows up in a world where the more common notion is self-fulfillment. So where the idea is to take the capacities that God has given us and to use them well in service of the kingdom. All of which, I mean, you can make a very good case for self-fulfillment in serving the common good as being a wonderful Christian ideal. And, we all got talents, let's develop them and use them, make the world a better place. And then we'll find our fulfillment, our happiness in doing that. Self-fulfillment can get off the track in other directions of being totally selfish. Individualism says, I'm going to pull my own strings, do my own thing, and find my own fulfillment, out of any kind of communal context, and do it myself, don't need help. So, Thomas Merton grows up in a Western-oriented, in a Christian-oriented thing. So, Merton's insight, in many ways, was to learn from the East. He had wonderful conversations with D.T. Suzuki, a Buddhist, and with the Chinese wisdom tradition, learned a lot from them. But he came to it as a corrective to Western modes of thought. It became another way of seeing the world, so that Merton then was on a journey that was carefully, worked out in terms of achieving his own illumination. So we know he died in the group of monks over in Thailand. So the Eastern mystical traditions, with their great emphasis on self-realization, was very important in his development. And he brought it to the Western world, and for many Catholics, I suppose, especially, in a way that we wouldn't get otherwise. So you had one of the birds of Zen and the birds of appetite, isn't it? And the way of Shuang Su, dialogues with the Eastern world. So in a sense, Merton can often speak to people in that corrected way. I think when you get down to it, with the dynamics that they saw are similar. I think they saw it essentially in the same way. I probably can find some differences in that, and the way Gandhi's prayer might be more Merton's prayer might be more Jesus-centered than Gandhi's and so on. So, you can find some differences, but the essential dynamic of being quiet, being open, when Ghandi talks about that inner voice, it sounds like what the Christian mystics talk about in being open to the Holy Spirit. The language is the same. So I think there is a commonness. So it could make, it's always dangerous to do that too much. In fact, one of the correctives I was making is that just to take Gandhi, I mean, we can't do what I did and think we understand Gandhi. Because I'm taking snippets that are meant to jog us, or force us to rethink. But in terms of being able to give a lecture by a Westerner who says, now we understand Gandhi, I don't think we can do that. Because it's a whole matrix, it's a whole culture. I mean, he lives in a non-dualistic world. Everything's together, God and us. We are incarnations of God for Gandhi. We are. Well, we can say that in a way in our Christian world as well. That's a really good point. It'd be fun to do a greater comparison on that, but that would be some ways that I would approach it. Yes. How about turning it on? And then,
I think we made it. I am somewhat aware of the political success achieved by Gandhi in gaining independence for India. But I'm ignorant of any success that he achieved in eliminating a highly discriminatory caste system in India. Was that not a factor in his concern?
Yeah, that's a very good point again. Yeah, as a matter of fact, he was very taken with that. The problem in India was largely the untouchables. One of the things he insisted on in his ashrams was that they bring untouchables into that situation. So he tried to bring them together. I remember him telling his wife, it's commanding her to clean up the toilets of the untouchables. That's the lowest caste system, of course. So, as a matter of fact, he was very exercised by that. He felt like one of his great life mission, in a sense, was to bring the untouchables into the society as a whole and to raise up their status. It was a goal, and he worked at it and made some progress. I mean, I again was talking to a woman from India about trying to get a feel for how that was now yet, and that idea of living your separate world and not mingling. I mean, she told me, like her parents, this is a college-age student, her parents would not have gone into the home of a Christian person in India. Probably not gone into a home of a Jain or of a Muslim. They live separately like that. So, I mean, those separations are still very much part of the life in India. And despite what Gandhi tried to do, but there's no doubt he saw that. One telling thing he said that we might think about is that for Christians, the Jews were our untouchables. He was looking at the history of the Holocaust and the treatment of Jews. Very telling phrase, I think. So they were the outcasts. I mean, did he overcome the whole caste system? No. That's so built into the Indian culture that, as I say, even today, I mean, this young woman told me she would have no trouble going into a Christian home or visiting with others or so on. But her parents, now just one generation removed, would not. And she sort of suggested to me there would probably be a lot of people in India who would feel like that. And one thinks that it might be among the less educated and those less involved in the urban life and so on. But yeah, it was across the board. I mean, Gandhi had a wonderful feel for the whole human family. I mean, the unity of it. Every human being was important. In fact, not just human beings, but animals. He thought that one of the great things about Hinduism was the sacredness with which they treated the cow. And he was influenced by the Jains as well. The Jains in India will not hurt anything living. And some of the monks, when they're walking, they will sweep the ground in front of them so that they're not stepping on any creatures. So this feeling of the unity of the world, of all living things, the whole of God's creation, is a mindset that stands behind a lot of this. And so that moved Ghandi to be very open to the untouchables. He associated with them, he ate with them, he had them in his ashrams, and tried to break the system. Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you for continuing this series from one year to the next and doing such a fine job, and for being the inspiration of this beautiful place, and most of all for having a sound system where the people can actually hear. But now,
Thank you, Elmer. I appreciate that. The people, great money and thought went into the sound system. We spared no expense.
now, responding to that point about the caste system, my understanding is that it is no longer a legal, official, institutional structure, but the residual effects continue, that you have that stratification. Just like in the United States, we have racial caste system informally, and although it's not legalized by government anymore. Now, getting back here to a Ghandi story, I remember reading that one time in England, he was talking and he mentioned that the Sermon on the Mount was the most sublime teaching of world literature. So this one person asked him, well, sir, then would you think about becoming a Christian? He said, well, I would become a Christian when Christians become a Christian. And finally, switching just for a moment here, I read that the Pope Benedict's successor for the doctrine honcho in Rome is coming to speak in Cleveland. Used to be the bishop at San Francisco, now a cardinal. But I was intrigued by the topic of the title. That is, where do I find my sources of hope in the present world? So as I look in here and I think, boy, this is really demanding. This is really tough stuff. And in the consumer society, material sensate society of today, where do you find your sources of hope?
It's a personal question to me. First, I appreciate your comments, and the idea of, that was one of Gandhi's things, that unfortunately the Christians didn't live it out, and he was waiting for that and wanted to call us to that. In fact, during the war, he thought that, he actually said that he thought the Western world needed to learn from the East. And I think he saw himself as having a mission to not just to liberate India, but to speak wisdom to the Western industrialized world. He explicitly said that in terms of the East teaching the West. So I think he did certainly have that. When I think of the hope in the world, it's from, if you think about it from a church perspective, it is the wonderful work of the laity in this day. We've never had in the whole history of the church, I think, such an educated and involved lay people as we have today. And that's remarkable. I mean, if there's one thing you could say that Vatican II did that has taken hold, is in that phrase, we are the church. There's actually a lot of people walking around who believe that, and who live it, and who want their voice heard, and live the gospel out in the marketplace, and participate in the ministry of the church. So, I mean, to me, look at all other kind of things. We got priests, we got scandals, we got bishops who don't listen, and bishops who think of them as themselves as branch managers from coming out of Rome. We have all of that, you can't deny it. So it's hard there to locate these sources of hope so much, but when you look at the lay people, the way many lay people have taken hold, and we find people who have, if you go to the CTSA conventions, now Catholic Theological Society of America, decades ago they'd all be priests. Now today, I don't know what the percentage is, but a high percentage of lay people and in leadership roles in the CTSA. So, I mean, that's a wonderful thing. You look at the parishes, I think it's like 85% of the people in parish are lay women who are doing good work behind the scenes. And they're not presiding at the Eucharist, but they're running a lot of other things. They're running the RCIA program, or they're dealing with the students or whatever. I mean, doing all kinds of things. So I guess whenever I'm trying to think of the points of hope, it's somewhere along that line for me. And then I was, that is my homily Sunday, because it goes back to a lot. When you're talking about hope, one of the great dangers to me is what I call collective amnesia. That is to forget the good things that have happened. You know, I was using an example, and people do this a lot, but that, you know, if we were here in the late 1980s and someone said Nelson Mandela was going to be president of South Africa, and we're going to get rid of apartheid, or people in Czechoslovakia would elect Václav Havel as president, or the Berlin Wall is coming down, or the Soviet Union will collapse, and the Cold War would end, and you would think you're nuts for any one of them. And yet we lived through that. And we've seen that some people can actually remember those things. And so, there, I mean, when you think of the world, I mean, it's just a lot of good things happen overall. And it's hard to hang on to a lot of them. What about this side? Yeah,
I find it very interesting to consider dialogue with Ghandi as a way of presenting his main thoughts. And perhaps by way of summary for myself, I was just wondering if what Ghandi would have to say. And I'm thinking each one of these people, probably, each one of us is somewhat represented by each one of the examples that you gave.
Probably in our honest moments, we might find that.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, perhaps even on a lighter side, what would Ghandi have to say, abstracting the essential points of what you presented tonight to each of the individuals in dialogue? What would Ghandi have to say, perhaps, to the golfers who are going to be performing in a week or so at the Masters?
Should never use a sports example. Give me another way of getting at that. Well, I mean, are you talking about the people who run the Masters, or the people who can go there?
The guys who are actually hitting the ball. You know, playing within yourself, not worrying about the outcome, going to the mentor, all of these things. Preparation, doing the work, seeking truth.
There's all kind of issues around the Masters that bring up that Ghandi. I mean, Ghandi understood social sin in a deep way. You know, I mean, Ghandi wouldn't be happy the way women are treated at Augusta National. He probably wouldn't be happy with. I think that one time I was supposed to give a talk in that diocese down there, and I said, well, I'd be happy to come give a talk if you get me on Augusta National and play golf. So the bishop called me back and said, you're not going to believe this, but there's only one Catholic that belongs to Augusta National a number of years ago. You want to talk about the Waspish establishment, that's probably what's at work there. So, I mean, and then, of course, then it raises other things about competition, and I don't know if that's where you're going with that, but, you know, I mean, to see Tiger Woods approach that, And he's all out for that. He's going to practice hard and he's going to work hard. And we look at that and we say, man, that's, like some of us can say, that's marvelous. I mean, the way he can control his emotions out there, the way he can think his way through the round, the way he can produce under pressure. Say that puts us in touch with transcendence, with a bigger world. In other words, I can see it in that kind of way. I mean, I wouldn't have to see it negatively. The other thing it brings up is the monetary thing that Ghandi had all kind of problems with, the disparity in incomes. I mean, in the sports world, money is your way of saying where you fit. I mean, you can't talk about Alex Rodriguez signing with the Rangers, and his contract is unbelievable, all these millions of dollars, but it's got a clause. Clause is, if somebody else starts making more money than I do, then you got to up my salary. So I always have to make more than other people. I mean, there, I think Ghandi would have a field day with that. Of what's wrong with the Western world in the way we treat people, or the way we pay people. I mean, what does it mean to live in a culture where we don't pay teachers enough and pay other corporate leaders large amounts of money? And what wisdom is there in that? You know, it's trying to figure out how you make a better world. I mean, where's the action, education, and all that? So, I mean, Ghandi understood social sin. He wanted to change the system. Well, he understood he had to change arts and so on, but the system is what he wanted to get rid of, and the injustices of the system. So I think that he could probably do a lot with the masters and a lot of things connected with that. But I want to still celebrate Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson and let them go at it on Sunday afternoon at Amen Corner. Let them go at it. And I mean, I don't think Ghandi was into sports. As small as a youngster, I don't think he participated. How about one more? We got another one? Yeah, Pat, have a microphone.
I would,
And speak into it.
thank you. I think it's interesting, the Western culture, and one phrase that just stunned me was the renouncing of the fruits of action. And we are so typically looking for that, looking for the fruits of action. If you don't make it, you don't get it. And this just absolutely hit me right between the eyes, because we practice that faithfully every day. We don't renounce it, we want to increase it. And how the Western culture can assume this responsibility, it's an individual basis is a big concrete question, but what do you say about that? I mean, is that impossible for corporate success and the rest?
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, I think as Westerners, you can only hear it as a corrective, as a self-examination of what degrees we're carried away with success. And it's basically, my point is that living in the comparative moment. I think that is what happens so much, and that's what goes badly. The comparative mode. In other words, my worth is dependent upon how I'm better than somebody else. And so we're not going to move into an Eastern mentality on that. The Western world just isn't going to, somehow move totally beyond that and become like Ghandi would want us as he represents the Eastern world. But it stands there as an ongoing critique of forcing self-examination, I think. And I think it's possible to get better at it. You know, my example of Miriam, I think that Miriam is going to have to get over the fact that she didn't get this advancement. Now, Miriam might want to join with other women who are in the same situation, have a support group. She might find a way to challenge the policies of that corporation that keep her from moving up. You know, there's a lot of active things she can do, but when you get down to it, her main focus is inside of herself. Is she going to let this beat her down or not? Is she going to walk around lacking self-confidence because an unjust system kept her from getting a job? And that's where we still have some control. As Ronner said and others, that freedom lies finally in not being able to control all the externals. The freedom lies in the attitude we take towards all those externals, all the givens, all of the things that program us. We don't even know what all they are, but whatever they are, we can still take up an attitude. That's where we retain root freedom. So what I want Miriam to exercise that freedom. I think she can learn a lot. Renounce the fruits of action. Take a different attitude toward it. Work hard. Do your job. You're making a good living. It doesn't mean you're inferior because you didn't get this new job. You can make the most of it. No, I'm not against her trying to change the system, you know. I mean, in fact, it might be Gandhi's probably would have two-pronged approach. Change the system, get rid of patriarchal structures and sexist attitudes, and get fair practices within corporations of the university, whatever else it is, the church, and then try also to work on the inner attitude that goes with it. So I think that it would be a good time. Now, next week, you really don't want to miss all the lectures in this series next week, because it's Ken Hines talking about Augustine and bringing somebody with you. It's like he lives in Augustine's skin. He breathes Augustine. You'll never get Augustine like you'll get it next week from Ken Hines. He's unbelievable and a great speaker. So I invite you to come back next Tuesday for that.